Check 1 2, check 1 2, check 1 2. Okay. Okay, enough of Batman. Let's get started. All right. So, good evening, everybody. I believe I'm recording right now, so that's one of the things that I need to do in order to get set up for this class. As Christina mentioned, my name is Edward. My last name is Apostol. I have my initial information here on the screen, which is edward.apostle@utoronto.ca. Is my principal email. If you have any questions post our lecture discussion that you might need to send my way. Just a little bit about how I answer emails. I usually don't get to them immediately. I spend a specific period of time, perhaps in the evening and the morning, where I will focus on emails because then I get become obsessed and I look at my email client all day. And this is what we get from testing live. Wow, I got feedback on myself. But now we don't have feedback on myself. So hopefully you guys will be able to hear me. I have the headset hooked up just because I need to record the audio as part of the video. And this should probably be a little bit better now that you guys can hear me. So it's now broadcasting throughout the speakers as well. I'm just seeing if I still hear myself. Do you guys hear myself? Do I hear myself? If I do, then there's a little bit of an issue that I need to investigate. Also, just as a reminder to you all, our assistant instructors, Tom and Albert, will be walking around all throughout the discussion to provide some assistance, whether it be technical or just to kind of figure out where we are in the material. They're there to help you out. Also, just as a reminder, we're all available on Slack. Just be mindful of looking at our statuses on Slack. Sometimes we are actually physically online, but I will set my status to away if I'm not there. So if you're posting a message to me and no one's answering, maybe because I'm not physically there to answer you. But again, I will be there at certain points of time throughout the course duration, and usually on the evenings that we spend together and on the Saturdays, I usually spend some time afterward to sit in Slack to kind of provide some advice, to kind of monitor what's going on. And also, I gotta get this off my chest. There's so much brain power in this group right now. Like as I listened to each and every one of you and your background and where you're coming from, we can just like walk away and form like a new company right now to start up, and we have all these different departments, and everybody's coming around here to learn some coding, which is great. And it just made me recall the notion that I was at a conference recently involved as an MC, and one of the speakers was talking about the fact that coding is going to be a fundamental background for all professions. It's going to be just like mathematics. And so what you're doing right now is laying the groundwork for the future of your career, whatever field or vertical you might be in, whether it is in marketing and sales, or if it's in accounting, or if it's in physics. I mean, that's going to be quite impressive. But the idea is that a lot of the work that we're going to be exploring will involve the coding and development processes that you're going to be learning throughout this course. So it's very, very exciting. I'm actually personally excited to have you all here. This is actually one of the largest groups I've ever instructed. So with that in mind, we'll go to the actual formal presentation. I have to walk back and forth a little bit here because the camera is on me, so I got to show everybody that I'm still here and not a disembodied voice. Let's start. And I also, one thing I forgot was about my remote, so that I can walk around. But next time I'll make sure I will try to bring it so I don't have to stay at this podium all the time. So we already did some quick introductions. As we move forward in subsequent classes, I'm going to try to get to know each and every one of you on a more personal level. Because we have a large group, that's going to take some time for us to manage. But as Christina mentioned, we will be working in groups and in teams. And I like to practice what I would describe as a practical environment where coders and engineers and software developers, as well as other teams, work together, either in this kind of a startup scenario or either in a more corporate type environment. But there are some commonalities amongst them. For example, one thing that I will kind of try to promote is for us to get together in groups at some point during the class, not only to reintroduce each other in the beginning, but to talk about what we did in the last class, what we'll be doing today or in the current class, and the challenges that you might be facing with your particular homework assignments. You'll be talking to each other about it, and Tom and Albert and myself will be walking around to kind of observe and maybe make some pointed notes and advice to you guys. And that whole concept, we describe it as being called agile teams. I don't know if you ever heard of that before, where we try to kind of formulate and work together to kind of discuss the problems that we need to solve. So we're going to try to work in that typical scenario so that you can get immediately accustomed to that type of environment. And we'll also throw in some odd things along the way that are related to this sprint agile type process. We'll talk about retrospectives where things might have gone wrong. We'll talk about estimating how long it will take to solve your problems, and over time it should get more accurate. One of the things that I found as a new developer, and I also found with incoming developers to companies that I worked with, is that when they're given a task, they're like, well, I don't know how long it's going to take. So we're going to try to introduce that aspect to you so that you can begin to say, well, it's going to take me 2 years to finish that one problem of printing my name out. No, that's not the real case. But the idea is that you should get a little bit more accurate with your estimations from the get-go, so that maybe by the time you end up working, you really know what to do, and you can make a website and say it's going to take about 2.5 weeks, for example. Okay, so we want to try to work in that practical scenario as much as we can. And I hope that I can make the experience as exciting for you, as exciting as this animated turtle. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of memes in the slides, so if you're into that kind of thing, that's cool. A little bit more about myself. I was actually schooled here, okay? And like a lot of you, I don't come from a coding background, okay? I'm a pharmacist, somewhat. I did a lot of drugs in university. I did it legitimately. I don't practice pharmacy anymore because at the time when I was finishing my studies here at the University of Toronto, I discovered this thing called the internet. It was really brand new at the time, kind of ages me. I won't talk about that. That's another thing. But the idea was is that I was very, very curious about web pages and uh, images that took 3 minutes to load at that time in that stage of the internet, and emailing back and forth using these software programs. I believe they were called like Pine or Gopher or something like that, where they were all text-based, and I was working on a green screen with a black background. But that totally impressed me. And so much so that I investigated on my own how all these things worked while I was pursuing my studies here. And then I just happened to land a job, a OSAP type role where you know what OSAP is, where I have to pay off my debts for going to university. I was at the Faculty of Medicine for that time, and they asked me to build their first generation intranet sites. And at the time, it was like Netscape 0.9 beta was a popular web browser. It was HTML something or other. And as a result of that, and as a result of my curiosity, I got noticed by industry because there was nobody else doing it at that point in time. Okay, and I went early on to kind of build the first generation websites. And oh, by the way, yeah, I also teach yoga, which is another aspect of my life. And I've been in this industry for a long period of time. So when I filled in this slide and it says, hey, how long did you spend coding? Often people will say, oh, I spent like 10 years in the industry, I spent 20 years in the industry, I spent 15 years or whatever. I counted in coding hours. I spent like thousands and thousands and thousands of hours coding, just practicing coding or doing code for projects. And that built up my skill set to a sufficient point where I'm able to maintain a career since the late 90s. So, and on the side, as I said, I teach yoga. But that's a recent development because one of the things I think that Christina alluded to was a point of making a good life balance. Okay, and around 2010, I was a little bit burning out because I spent a lot of time coding, thousands and thousands of hours coding. And so I needed to get back into a sense of physicality, a sense of health, body health as well as mental health. And so I pursued yoga as an activity, and then I went to India and became a yoga teacher. I'll expand upon that as we go throughout our course together. Stuff I worked on a whole bunch of things that you might see listed here. My very first big, huge project was an e-commerce site for the Body Shop Canada. Quite impressive because nobody ever really built e-commerce websites at that point in time. I think the only other e-com site, there were very few, was some bookstore called Amazon. You might have heard of it. And if you happen to look at a picture of what Amazon looked like in the late 90s, early 2000s, you will laugh. You will seriously laugh because it was very, very simple. It looked like, if you were around that time period, you might have seen sites that were hosted by companies like GeoCities. Do you ever remember that? Or Angel Fire? Or if you ever recall having an account using a messenger system called ICQ. Uh-oh. So I was around that time frame, and then from that point on, I worked on another project called Archambault, which is the French language world's largest bookstore. And then I did this big, huge ecom project for Compaq. They needed to sell computers online. So I was part of a team, and I was one team in many teams throughout North America to help establish that ecom portal, selling these 10-pound gray Compaq laptops that you can buy with your credit card online. And then from there, I went on to build some other stuff, and my career evolved not only to build web stuff, but to build mobile apps. So I worked on XM satellite radio, for example. I worked on an app for a company called Event Mobi. They're still around, of course, but if you ever go to a conference or event, there's an app that will show you who are all the presenters, what they're talking about, what's the schedule, and if you play a game online, you can win an iPad at that conference and stuff like that. So I've worked on all these things. I've also spoken at conferences. I wrote 2 books back in the day. I've written a whole bunch of courseware. So these things became involved in my life because I spent the time devoted to learning how to code. And I think all you guys can do it too. Okay. So with the path to learning, as I said, I switched careers, and I think you guys can too. Not necessarily ditch your old one per se, because you might still rely on it to some degree, but use the coding experience either to augment what you're doing now or to totally replace. Totally up to you. Okay. Why do you want this career? Maybe you do want to escape your current line of work. Maybe you have this dream project. Okay. Maybe you want to just kind of create things and use another part of your brain. Maybe you have some sort of fascinating idea. There is a level of financial stability in this industry, and I'll talk about that, I believe, in session 5, which we call the interview. Okay. I've been through like spells of work where I would just take one interview, for example, and I got the job. And then there was another period of time, not so happy period, where I did like 30 interviews in 40 days. It was insane. Okay. But again, I'll talk about that experience when we get to that point. But it is self-sustaining, and the fact that you can do 30 interviews and still land a job just shows you how many jobs are out there right now for this kind of position. Okay. You might want to attain some sort of financial freedom. Of course, we all want to do that. We want to challenge yourself, and that's why I'm stuck in this industry of coding. I like to solve puzzles. Okay, it's so cool when you get a piece of code to work. I can't imagine how thrilled I am every time I get something to work and I could see it on the screen, and it is actually helping people do something with their work, okay, or their lives. Okay. And yeah, you can be a role model for your kid too. Okay. So we take the teaching and learning process very, very seriously. We want to help you 100% of the way. As Christina mentioned, we have a large team of people to help bring your objectives all together by October, November. Okay. But as I said, nothing good comes easy. So there are some things that you might need to learn. As I said and alluded to before, you don't have to spend all your time coding. Okay. Spend the time that you need to code effectively. Okay. Find the solutions that you need quickly. And I always ask myself, if I can't find the solution in like maybe 5 to 7 minutes, then I start to look for collaborative answers. Okay. You should look at everything with a sense of wonderment. This is not my child, but it's a wonderful looking baby nonetheless. I have a daughter who's probably about this child's age as well, and she just learned how to count to 10 yesterday, and it was just the most incredible experience. Now, programming aside, that was amazing. That to me is like an amazing experience. So I still look at this programming field, this career, with the same wide eyes as my daughter does when she learns how to count to 10. Okay. So when it comes to web development, don't say you know anything. Pretend you know nothing. Okay, I still look to this day when I do coding, I look at it from the perspective that I don't know it. Okay, because you will learn something new from your colleagues. You might glean some insight into yourself as you try to explore solutions to your particular problems. Okay, you might know a little bit because I think I heard a few you said you know some front end coding. And so you're looking at the back half of coding for full stack. But really, these terms that you hear, full stack, front end, back end, they're all just there just to provide some sort of construct so that you can understand or conceptualize or compartmentalize a segment of coding in the entire spectrum. If you know coding, then you should be able to code anywhere. That's how I deal with it. Okay? And that's how I was able to jump into mobile application development because the same logic exists in mobile apps as well as creating websites. Okay? The structure might be different, but it's just like saying there's a way to say write a sentence in English, there's a way to write a sentence in French, but the meaning is still the same. And if you look at it like that, it becomes a little bit easier and a little bit more human. Okay. So that's you probably right now at the lower right-hand corner in this vast universe of programming. Don't feel intimidated, okay? And feel okay if things go wrong. All right. There are, and Christina mentioned this, there are community groups, not only the ones that we'll probably be creating over the next couple of months, but there are community groups outside in the city where developers come together to talk about various topics. And I know that one of those meetings that they always set up is what I call the FOAD meeting. F meaning a very profanity style word, off and die. Okay. F off and die. So the idea is that presenters who work in startups or in successful companies will talk about how they failed and how they failed immensely. And they're not afraid to talk about it because what they do is they just pull themselves back up and start again. Okay. And although I've done a number of websites and I've done a number of mobile apps, I've been involved in projects that were extremely foobarred. I've been let go in some companies because the coding velocity was really high and I wasn't fast performing enough. That's the fact of life, right? But you get proficient of it over time. And if you tend to spend your coding experiences on something that you love, something that you enjoy doing, you will be more efficient at it as well. I will give you that fact. There were some coding projects I did that I was like, yeah, whatever, right? But there were some coding projects that I was really, really interested in because I like to travel, for example. So I worked on some travel websites and I wanted to know how travel bookings worked. So then I can cheat at Expedia. No, just kidding. But that's the idea. Do stuff that you love. Okay. So there's a number of obstacles that you will face along the way. Okay. This is the most common one. My code doesn't work. I don't know why. My code doesn't work. I don't know why. And you start banging your head. All right. That usually occurs around 11:37 p.m. Eastern Time for most developers. But the idea is that it will be confusing. It will take some time, and reach out. Reach out. Okay. I know for a fact for myself that it was hard for me to reach out to others to get help in solving problems. I think part of it for me was a sense of pride. I want to solve the problem myself. Okay. But then I also look at the fact that the time is ticking forward, 11:38 p.m., 11:39 p.m., 12:02 a.m. And A, my body's craving for sleep. B, I now want to see my daughter the next morning and not be a dead weight. And I want to be able to communicate and do other things in my life. Okay? So seek others for help. You're not dumb. You just probably can't find the answer that you're looking for at that point in time. I've discovered that nothing is really impossible in coding. It might just take another leap and hurdle to solve it. So learning to code requires a number of things along the way as you make this path toward coding success. Persistence is one, and being self-confident, okay, that you can do this. And I will suggest, as you guys talk to Slack to each other on Slack, to give yourself a sense of positivity and reinforce each other, okay, especially when we get a little bit down in the middle of the night, okay. So we're going to try, and I'm going to try to help you learn the code. I've been in classes in my undergrad experience, for example, where everything was you learn it by rote. Good luck. Okay. I've been in classes where I sat with 1,500 people trying to listen in onto the lecturer, trying to understand the concepts. So as I had that experience, I'm trying to show or trying to convey something different as an instructor to you guys, that we can learn some basic structure, some basic foundations, okay, and help you guys eventually build the knowledge that you need, okay? So work hard, as we say. The next premise is to appreciate your successes, jump up and down, go for a walk, get a drink, do what you need to do to enjoy what you got, okay? And do all the self-care that you like, okay? Because that's important as well. And ultimately, trust yourself, okay? There's a dog coming up. You're awesome, okay? Now, for pace, some of you might go a little bit faster in the course, which is fine. Tom and Albert will probably provide you some little bit of extra fun work to kind of play around with to help expand your mind. Some of you might be a little bit behind. That's fine. Tom and Albert and myself will help you keep the pace. Okay? But work with a team. Always rely on the assistance of others as well. I have some interesting thoughts about this slide. Google Foo. Okay? Yes, you can look up the answers everywhere. I will say if you're looking up the answers, that's fine. But then I might ask you, what does the answer mean? Okay? And that will differentiate you from someone who's using the world of the internet effectively versus someone who's just copying, pasting that solution that you might have found through searching the internet. Okay. And now initially I will say, yeah, you could probably copy paste for the first few times. No, don't worry about that because you're still learning. But then after those few copy paste experiences, take a moment to reflect and look at what you copy pasted. What does it do? How can you explain it to the rubber ducks that you have in front of you? Okay. In terms of how it works. Because if you could explain it to the rubber duck, then you could probably explain it to somebody else, and then you could probably explain it to some coding manager or a team lead, and that's an inroad to landing some form of meaningful work. Okay? So in terms of the course structure, generally at every session, I'll try to establish some objectives, what we're trying to learn. I'll give you some background theory. I'll walk through an exercise or two with you. You'll have your laptops on, of course. You'll have your editors or your various editing software launched and ready to go. So be prepared for that at every single class. One suggestion I would say is that if you can do it before class, like launch, I believe you're using Visual Studio Code as an editor. Maybe you have this terminal program called Git Bash open. Maybe you'll have a browser open with a bunch of tabs, maybe with your work in progress. Have them all ready and then set your computer to sleep before you come over here. That way, when you turn on your computer here, it's all running. Yes, it does use a little bit of battery power if you keep it in sleep mode. You might also run it in hibernate mode, which might work a little bit better. But the idea is just to have it running on the get-go at the start of class so that we don't kill time launching tools. Okay. There will be, of course, some code discussions along the way. As I said, there will be exercises in class that you will do. They'll be fairly collaborative, unless I say you guys are working on your own. Okay. At which time, show some strength to find that ability to work on your own and not peek at each other's laptops. Or I might say turn off Google, Bing, Yahoo, and try to work on a text editor to figure things out. I also suggest a very old school tool, and I see a number of you guys doing that, pen and paper. because nothing helps exercise the brain more than using a hand with a pen device and writing things down. Might be a little bit slower, but statistics and surveys and studies indicate that when you're typing stuff, because you're typing at the speed that the lecturer like myself is talking, you might not catch all of it. Your brain might not catch all of what you're typing in. But if you're writing, you're taking the time to think things out. And even draw diagrams. That won't hurt you at all. Okay. And then there's homework at the end, and there's project work related as well. Okay. So the super important stuff is these code discussions, as I said, the in-class exercise, and the project work, because that's where you're going to get some practical learning experience along the way. Okay. Are there any questions so far about the flow of a daily session? Okay. Also, just to give you a heads up, we will take breaks. Um, I can see when people are awake or asleep. And just to bear in mind, I believe we have these lectures on Saturday where you'll have one instructor guiding with 6 TAs. And the reason why is that we bring all the cohorts together, okay, on Saturday. So it will be a larger group. I foresee that you guys will be talking to each other and sticking around together as a group initially, but feel free to mingle with the other students as well from the other classes, because they will give you some feedback and insight into how they're getting an approach to learning for coding, and maybe that will help you out as well. Okay. Pre-work. So I did an initial check at that bootcamp V2 site, or yeah, I think it was bootcamp V2. There's a certain page there that said, did you guys get this all set up? And Christina kind of iterated it briefly. Did anybody have any challenges setting up the software? Raise your hands. No? Yes? Sorry, what's your name? Dave? Okay, and which piece of software did you have a challenge with? Oh, the website. The Bootcamp Scott V2. Could you not log in? That was your problem? Yeah, I had that same problem today. Best thing is to send a Slack message, likely to one of the TAs first, because I don't know if you have access to a channel that's called BCS support. You may have access to it. You might see it in your Slack list of channels. If you do, you can send it to Bootcamp support directly. If not, then we can probably help you out along the way. Yes? Oh, yes, the class Slack group. I believe you're already on it. And the Slack group, just bear with me here. I'll just drag and drop this. I believe there is a Slack group or channel called Class 1 Private, because there's like 21 people there, but I understand that there's obviously more. Oh, can you guys see that? Oh, you can also see Batman. Well, that's amazing. Okay, so this is the Class 1 Private. This is our class channel as a whole, and I noticed that there are 21 people on it. And this is UTCB May 2018. So when you install Slack, and then it asks you to connect to a group of some sort, or a web URL or something like that, you would connect to UTCB May 2018, I think .slack.com or something like that. Then you would input your email address, maybe a password if you already had one, or it will ask you to start up your account, and then you get into that particular system. Does that make sense? Maybe because you haven't been added yet. So maybe talk to Tom or to Albert, and then maybe they can get them to add you on, or they'll get someone who's has the admin access to add you on to add you appropriately. There's a few conversations there right now. It looks like about editors. And the room number. Also to let you know logistically, although we meet here, I believe on Mondays and Wednesdays, obviously with the 3 cohorts coming on Saturday together, we'll be meeting in a much larger room. I honestly don't know if you've been informed which room that will be or which building it will be. Obviously something bigger than this. It might be down the street on St. George, but you will get your regular notifications of it either through Slack or through email, maybe through me through email if I find out, or through some other channel, okay, to know where the Saturday classes are. Okay. So how many people cannot get in Slack? Just two? You're just not on the class one private channel. So yeah, I would probably ask Albert or Tom to maybe assist you. I don't know if they have the rights to add. Maybe they do. We just had two students who are not in that group. I have access to a large number of groups just because I'm an instructor. You'll also notice that there's a group called Parking Lot. That's for everybody. Okay, so that's all like 90 people or some odd. So you can feel free to chat with other folks that are in that particular channel at this point in time. And random, I believe everybody has access to because that's a default channel for everybody as well. Okay. Any other tools, software programs people are having issues with at this time? Yes. GitHub. Are you the person that was on Slack talking about an SSH key issue? No? You can't launch GitHub, the GitHub desktop tool, or you cannot log in. The desktop tool. Okay, so maybe you guys can make a note of that too so that you can help. Sorry, what's your name again? Because I don't see your card. Your card is gone. Oh, you didn't have a card. Oh, well, then we'll have to get you a card. Here's a card for you. Do you have a pen? You can write your name on it and then put it there so then I can know who you are as well. And just for demonstration purposes, for me, I will sometimes illustrate the code using Visual Studio Code. It's one tool I use. My default editor I use is a tool, well, I use many tools, but I use what's called the IntelliJ line of software, or JetBrains rather, they're the company. And I use a tool called WebStorm. Not that I'm promoting them or anything, but because you guys are students too, if you are interested in trying out that program, I believe you get a free 90-day license or something like that if you apply as a student. You just have to go online and submit some form of proof that you're registered in the course. And I believe then they'll get a link to download it. But there are some instructions there. If you want some clarification on that, you can ask me. But for the most part, I would say stick to Visual Studio Code unless you have time to explore other tools. Okay. What's more important about that, and I'm just trying to remember the long-term goal, was just to kind of say it doesn't matter about the tool you use as long as you know how to use it to effectively write code, because that's what it does. It just helps speed up the process of writing your code for you. Okay, so let me return back to my PowerPointy so I can remember where we are. And it might take a moment for the screen to refresh quickly. That's beautiful. Let's see if I could flick this. Hey, okay, cool. Let's talk about the accounts again. So we have one person who has trouble with GitHub Desktop, but everybody has created accounts for GitHub, Heroku. We'll talk about that later. Have you guys created a LinkedIn account? I'm assuming a lot of you do, just because it's a way to get roles. I will say that LinkedIn has attributed to probably about 30 to 35% of my last number of jobs. People have reached out to me through LinkedIn. It's a very effective tool. Okay, so that also just gives you some inkling to keep your profile up to date, fill it in with some appropriate information that's relevant to your career experience, and to connect with others on the LinkedIn network. Yes? Is there a GitHub team for the course? Sorry? Is there a GitHub team for the course? A GitHub team. For what purpose? Just connecting everybody. Oh, well, we connect through GitLab. Okay. So I think one of the products that you were asked to connect to was GitLab, and GitLab is really just GitHub for everybody just to share their work and contribute their work and submit their work. So we're not using like the GitHub for Teams aspect of it, although metaphorically speaking, it's the same. It's the same functionality. Okay. And just to kind of clarify, we'll talk about Git in the next lesson and GitHub. but basically it is a versioning tool. And what a versioning tool is that if you replace parts of code in a file, it manages which version is up to date and manages the changes that are made, because sometimes people make mistakes and you have to go back to another version of that file. So that basically is what GitHub is all about. And then we share all those resources together. Um, Everybody have an account on Stack Overflow, otherwise known as, all the answers are there. Just look up Stack Overflow. Okay, good. I'm on Stack Overflow occasionally. Sometimes I will provide an answer occasionally, but it is a good resource. Um, they seem to have like the website and the people who are on it seem to have a little bit of a mindset or culture of their own, because if you like, you know, put a question on and they consider it to be like, well, that question is useless. They'll say, it was already repeated here before. Take a look at this link. And then they'll try to shut you down. But, you know, feel free to pose questions there, because it will help you out eventually. So Visual Studio Code is checked, right? Launched. Except for one or two, you have Git. You have a Node. I don't know where that is on the side. Did you guys install Node already? And with Node, you installed the Node package manager? Did you guys ever wonder what Node is about? Because we're not going to cover it in this lesson. And I'm like looking at the TS like, we're not covering it in this lesson. No, we're not. But Node, if you like to think about it, it's like a library of JavaScript utilities. JavaScript being the programming language that we explore in this course. And the idea is that people build these books, these library books written in JavaScript that will perform a task. Okay. So you installed Node and NPM, the Node package manager, which is kind of like the librarian. You've installed Git, and you've installed Heroku. So, terminology. Full stack development, I said it's a relative term, right? So in your interviews in the future, they're going to ask you, are you like a full stack developer? Are you familiar with the mean stack? Are you familiar with the MERN stack? Are you familiar with a stack? It's just different parts of a platform of coding tools that you'll use to create an application. Okay. If you literally want to know what the icons mean right now, yeah, sure. M is Mongo, right? Mongo, the database program. E is for Express, which is a framework of code that is used to write part of the application that you will be building, right? It's a framework. React is another part of the application that you'll be building, but it uses the same language that they use in Express. And you can easily substitute that R with A, which I believe is Angular. Okay, it's just another way of coding. Okay, and N stands for Node. Okay, which is the software that kind of puts all these things together. Okay, so we're going to talk about all this stuff for you. And at this point in time, you might like to take a look at YouTube. Okay, YouTube is a typical example of a MERN or mean type application because it can be broken down into a number of sections. Okay, a front end, this is the user interface, is created with the R or A part of the code of MERN or mean. That's what I mean. Okay, so R, remember, stands for React. Okay, or A stands for Angular, if you like to look at that. So there's some segment of code that's written for the front end. Okay, that's the A or R. N is the Node set of tools or libraries, these books that you can borrow to help build the infrastructure for the application. M is for Mongo, which is the database part, which stores all the information about the videos that you're watching. Okay. And E Express is kind of this code part that says, hey, I'm going to receive some information about what the user wants to serve or request, like I want to watch Madonna videos, and then I want to go to the database to find out where it is. Okay. So this slide basically represents a typical relationship of where all those different pieces come together to form a site like YouTube. I have a love-hate relationship with YouTube from a developer perspective because many years ago, here's another anecdote about what I did. Many years ago, I taught at another university and I proposed to my students, I go, you know what? You know what would really be cool? You would take what's called a discussion board, which was brand new at a time, and we'd use this tool, which is called Flash Media Server. I don't know if anybody's heard of that, but that was the very first software program that was allowing the uploading of videos and distributing them to the masses. And I said, what if you combine this discussion board with this video serving utility tool and create a website where people can post videos and make some feedback about it, about those videos? And then a year later, YouTube came out. I was so pissed. And then YouTube got bought out by Google 2 years later, I think for $1 billion. I remember. I was really bitter at that time. And I had another analogy like a couple of years earlier. I was like, and at this time, this is the early 2000s, I was like saying, you know what would be great if we had this database, like an access database that stored a list of things that people like to surf to on the web. And a developer would build this form where you could input what you'd like to surf or browse to, and it'd show a list of results. Then Google came out, Yahoo came out, Excite was still there, Alta Vista was the oldest one. How many people remember Alta Vista? All right, some of you do. Dogpile, well, I don't know if you know Dogpile, but that was a search engine that accumulated all the search engines. I was pissed. So I said to myself, I would never propose a potential intellectually creative, make money type idea in a class again. I kid. I will talk about those ideas because they will come up all the time, but it's just food for thought with the things that you can produce with the code that you're learning right now. Okay. Don't get intimidated by this diagram. It just shows the flow of getting that stuff that you see in a web browser. Okay. I actually honestly don't know how much time I have to talk about. How are we doing for time, by the way? We good? Let me flip. It's 8 o'clock. Okay, we got a little bit of time. After this, I'll take a short break, okay? So the long and the short of it is that in modern web applications, you got a front-end view where the user interacts with stuff. Maybe click a button or input information in the text field. And at this point in time, we send that request to whatever you're talking about to some segment of code, which in this chart says it's called Express. Okay. How many people here have heard of Microsoft.NET? Have you heard of .NET technology? Yeah? Can you tell me, Carter, what does .NET mean to you?
A framework to build applications.
Sure. That was written in another language, right? So Express is very similar to that .NET area of code. It often receives requests for data, except the fact that Express is written in JavaScript instead of C# or Java. That's another back-end type thing, or Perl. That dates me. Then the idea is that this code gets interpreted by this guy called Node. Node is the guy that reads all this code and does something. Okay. And again, I'll allude to this as we move on and move forward with the discussion. But the idea is that we read the code, and then maybe that instruction set says, go talk to a database and get me information. Yes?
The mic's off.
Is it really? How could it be off? Well, it's coming through here too. This microphone, that's very curious. Yeah, this microphone is just for the speakers. But if you guys can hear me, that's fine. This is for the recording, and it's still green. Okay? So hopefully, okay, but you should be able to hear me hopefully for the recording, and I do tend to speak loud. This was just a nice add-on to have that wireless mic going. But I'll remind the TA, not you guys, I'll remind the lab techs to check the battery because I do see it being red, and I don't know why. Okay, anyway, so as I said, we talk to a database to get the data that we need. Then it gets returned to this Node Express mechanism, and along the way, You get these results back, and we need to put it in some sort of template, like an HTML template, like bold tags and italic tags, and fill in the pieces of information that we got from the database, like the first name, the last name of the user, the name of the video, and maybe the name of the file that needs to be served. Right? It's kind of like Microsoft Word, where you have these placeholders to use to generate like mailing labels. You guys ever seen that kind of thing done before in Microsoft Word or similar tools? Maybe, maybe not. I've done it before to create mailing labels to send invitations out and stuff like that. So the idea is that this part here in the chart, they talk about handlebars, basically is a template generator, and there's blanks that get filled in from the database. Node says, okay, we got the template, we got the data. Express says, return it back to your web browser in a nice, pretty web page. Because web browsers, all they do is interpret the JavaScript and HTML code and make it pretty for you. This might date some of you. How many people used WordPerfect before? God, good. Okay. It's also in Word, but it's harder to see. In WordPerfect in Word, do you guys remember a function called reveal codes? No? Okay. I think it was Alt F6. But the idea is when you're typing stuff in a word processor, behind the scenes, there is code that is used to identify a word or phrase that is bold, or a word that is phrased as italicized, or a word or phrase that's a heading. Okay? They're like tags. In fact, it used to be called standard generalized markup language, but that's another history lesson. Okay? So the web browser is kind of like that word processor where it reads that result and just makes it pretty for you to interact with. And then accepts further input from you. Say, I want to go visit another video, for example. And the whole cycle repeats again. Okay? Any questions at all about that? That whole process. We called it the World Wide Web. All right. I promised that I would take a break, so let's take a quick break now. We'll talk about this slide when we get back, and then we'll get cracking to some code. So let's talk about everything again in about 10 minutes, okay?
Is it pause?
I believe it's, yep.
Uh, what's the deal with the timing? Like, how do we know like it's
Okay, so my understanding is that there's a spreadsheet, a README document that illustrates the timing for each of the exercises as well as my discussion.
okay?
Um, and you guys will just help me and cue me. Um, I think what I've seen is that like 5 minutes before a time, just flag me or Slack me if you're at the other end of the room to say, I got 5 minutes left to talk about whatever you're talking about. And I'll just speed up to whatever I'm talking about and I'll move on to the next topic. Um, and mhm, let me see. So if I go to 01 class content and I show, it's all somewhere around here. This is class content. Let's go back. Lesson plans, possibly. I think we're part-time, which confused me because well, I thought it was full-time, and when I looked at full-time when I taught on Saturday, there were some exercises that I noticed, but then when I actually went to the part-time folder, thinking that was the folder I visited before, some of the exercises were gone, I went, oh, where the heck are they? So, um, so there's a day one, and yeah, let's go there.
High tech.
I don't know which sure it's showing. There was a there's a pause somewhere. Desktop PC. I don't know why it's not flipping. Oh, maybe I just sent it to the projector. I don't know. Anyway, it's off for now. Just to say something. Oh, there's the desktop. So see, there's a time tracker
Yeah.
and a time tracker Excel sheet.
So there's one for every day, and just tells you
Yeah,
how
every
many
lesson.
minutes
Yeah.
to do
So
what.
see, so
Okay.
we're at break, right on time, and I
Perfect.
we confirmed the pre-work. Um, we talked about the course structure. So we talked a little bit about this already, and then we're now going to do intro to terminal, some console commands, intro to HTML, and I end at 9:30.
Okay. Cool.
Yep. So yeah, cue me in.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll have that sheet
Yeah. I'll
launched.
open it up.
Yeah,
I
just
didn't know there was a.
yeah, and then just cue me and just say, hey, it's you can even say Ed. We should move on. I go, okay, sure.